The meeting ends at 10:45 a.m. The decision was made at 10:15, though nobody explicitly said so. You put a proposal on the table. Perhaps it was for a headcount expansion, a remote work adjustment, or a budget for a new software architecture. You had the data, you had the logical flow, you even had the passion. But what you received in return was the polite corporate nod, the "we'll put a pin in this" deference. As you walk back to your desk or close the Zoom window, the visceral feeling isn't anger, it's invisibility. You feel like a signal that failed to propagate through the network. This is the baseline friction of individual advocacy. When you speak as a singular node in a complex system, your friction is interpreted as noise, not signal. The system is designed to stabilize itself against individual outliers. If you are the only one speaking, you are, by definition, an outlier. We often misdiagnose this moment. We go home and rewrite the slide deck. We sharpen our arguments. We think, if I just explain the logic more clearly, they will understand. This is the isolation tax. We spend energy refining the content of the message, ignoring the architecture of the delivery mechanism. In systems engineering, we know that a single point of failure is a vulnerability. In corporate dynamics, a single point of advocacy is a vulnerability. When you advocate alone, you allow the leadership team to categorize your request as a preference or a grievance rather than a structural necessity. You become the squeaky wheel. And while the squeaky wheel gets the grease, in modern, optimized organizations, the squeaky wheel often gets replaced. We need to stop trying to be louder versions of ourselves and start looking at the wiring of the room. There is a prevailing myth that excellent work combined with a clear request yields a result. This is the meritocratic fallacy. Real-world organizations are political entities, not purely logical ones. Politics in this sense isn't a dirty word. It is simply the allocation of finite resources based on perceived risk and reward. When you ask for something alone, the risk of ignoring you is low. You might be annoyed, but you are manageable. The reward of ignoring you is that the status quo is maintained and the budget remains untouched. This is the friction point we are solving today. The terrain is hostile to the individual because the individual lacks leverage. Leverage is not volume. Leverage is not being right. Leverage is the implied cost of inaction. As long as you are a constituency of one, the cost of inaction is negligible. Before we dismantle this isolation, a brief calibration. If you are tired of navigating these unseen political architectures alone, you need a different kind of map. PathFindHer is that map. We are building a collective of strategists who are moving from navigation to architectural design. If you want to stop guessing and start building, look for the link in the show notes. Now, let's look at the physics of why groups succeed where brilliant individuals fail. The compass for today is collective action theory. In political science and economics, this explores how groups work together to achieve public goods. But in your career, we are stripping away the academic fluff. We are looking at one specific concept, the shift from private knowledge to common knowledge. When you have a problem, say, the promotion cycle is biased or the on-call rotation is burning out the mothers on the team, and you complain to a friend, that is private knowledge. It evaporates. Common knowledge is different. It is not just that everyone knows the problem. It is that everyone knows that everyone else knows the problem. When a frustration becomes common knowledge, it becomes a structural fact. It ceases to be an opinion and starts to look like a liability. To operationalize this, we must distinguish between a crowd and a constituency. A crowd is just a group of people standing in the same room. A constituency is a group of people aligned by a specific interest who have the capacity to act. Most corporate affinity groups, the women's network, the parents group, act like crowds. They gather, they vent, they drink coffee. They function as pressure valves, releasing tension so the system doesn't have to change. We want to build a constituency. A constituency doesn't vent, it negotiates. The governing principle here is do not present a problem until you can present the people affected by the problem as a unified data point. You are moving from I feel to we represent. Think of this through the lens of data redundancy. If one hard drive contains a critical file and that drive fails, the file is lost. If 3 drives contain the file, the data is resilient. In a boardroom, if one person says, "This deadline is unrealistic," they are labeled as slow or difficult. If 3 distinct high performers from different departments say, "This deadline creates a structural risk to Q4 delivery," that statement has redundancy. It becomes objective reality. The compass setting for you is this: never go into a high-stakes negotiation without redundancy. You don't necessarily need the other people in the room with you physically, but you need their data and their endorsed alignment in your pocket. Let's anchor this in a real-world scenario. I worked with a director of engineering. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah's company had a generic Women in Tech group. It was, frankly, a dead zone. They met once a quarter for a panel discussion on imposter syndrome. It was soft power, which meant it was no power. Meanwhile, the company had a brutal availability policy, expecting responses to Slack messages within 15 minutes, even after 6 p.m. This was bleeding the parents dry, specifically the mothers. Sarah tried to bring this up in her one-to-ones with the VP. She was told, "We need to stay agile." She was dismissed as not being committed enough to the hustle. She was hitting the individual friction point. Sarah stopped complaining. She went back to the Women in Tech group. She stopped the panel discussions on feelings. She said, "We are going to do a time audit." She rallied 30 women and 10 male allies to track their hours, specifically flagging interruption time after 6 p.m. and its correlation to code quality the next morning. She didn't use emotional language. She used the language of the business: efficiency, error rates, and churn. She turned the affinity group into a research unit. They spent 3 months gathering this data. They weren't gossiping, they were building a dossier. This is the shift from a coffee club to a shadow cabinet. The pivotal moment came during the annual operating review. Sarah wasn't invited to present on culture. She was invited to present on operational efficiency, because she had the data. When she walked in, she didn't say, "I'm tired." She projected a slide showing that the 15-minute response expectation was causing a 14% increase in bug rates due to cognitive fragmentation, costing the company an estimated $200,000 per quarter in rework. Then, the kicker. She revealed that this data was validated by 40% of the engineering staff, her constituency. The room went silent. It wasn't Sarah versus the VP anymore. It was the data plus the constituency versus bad policy. The policy was changed 2 weeks later. Not because they cared about feelings, but because the constituency made the cost of the status quo visible. Dissect that victory. Sarah didn't ask for permission. She didn't ask for sympathy. She built an alliance based on shared professional friction. She converted that friction into a metric, and she delivered it with the weight of 40 people behind her. She utilized strategic peers, not just friends, but colleagues who understood that their individual pain was a systemic inefficiency. This is the landmark. The moment you realize your internal groups are not for socializing, they are for organizing. Now the path. How do you build this if you don't have a formal group? You start small. You need an informal power circle. You are looking for two specific people. We call this the Strategic Triad. You need one peer who is upstream from you, someone whose work feeds into yours. And you need one peer who is downstream, someone who consumes your work. If you are in marketing, your upstream might be product, they make the thing, and your downstream might be sales, they sell the thing. These are not necessarily your lunch buddies, they are your structural partners. Here is the protocol. Do not send a meeting invite titled Chat. Send an invite titled Process Calibration. The script is simple. You say, I'm seeing some friction in how our projects are handing off, and I think it's slowing us both down. I want to sync for 20 minutes to see if we can align our approach to the Q3 goals. When you meet, you do not vent. You lay out a specific systemic block. I notice we're both getting blocked by legal on Tuesdays. If we both send our requests on Monday morning jointly, we might clear the queue faster. You are proposing a micro-alliance. Once you have your upstream and downstream allies, use the if-then protocol for advocacy. If one of you is challenged in a meeting regarding a timeline, then the other two immediately validate the concern. This is the echo effect. If the product lead says, we can't ship this yet, and the marketing lead, you, stays silent, the product lead looks weak. If you immediately chime in with, agreed, and from a go-to-market perspective, pushing a buggy launch will hurt our brand metrics, you have just doubled the structural weight of the objection. You protect each other not out of loyalty, but out of strategic alignment. The final step of the path is the documentation pact. When a decision is made verbally that negatively impacts your triad, one of you must write the for the record email. Just to recap our discussion, we are deprioritizing feature X despite the risk to Y. The pact is that you copy your allies on this email. They reply with a simple confirmed. Now you have a paper trail with witnesses. You are creating a history of governance. This is how you protect your career while navigating the gray zone. This week, I want you to identify your triad. Look at the organizational chart. Who feeds you work? Who do you feed? Set the meeting. Stop trying to be the hero who fixes the system alone. Heroes get exhausted. Architects get results. Build the alliance. We've covered the terrain of isolation, the compass of collective action, the landmark of the data-driven constituency, and the path of the strategic triad. I need to know your coordinates. Which part of this map is missing in your current role? Do you have the data but no constituency? Or a group that does nothing but complain? Send me a message or leave a review with your coordinate. Let's map the next leg of the journey together.